Good evening, everyone. My name is Ryan Katz-Rosine. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Ottawa and president of the Environmental Studies Association of Canada, or ESAC. ESAC is very pleased to have teamed up with the Humanities Research Institute to bring you a special presentation by acclaimed writer and activist and many other great things, Winona LaDuke, who will be officially introduced in just a moment. When those of us on the ESAC board heard of the opportunity to bring Ms. LaDuke to Regina, we were eager to partner up with the Humanities Research Institute to have their annual Barbara Powell Memorial Lecture coincide with our own annual conference keynote address. And I should note it's been a true partnership ever since, and I want to thank Dr. Ian Germani of HRI, especially for all the work he's done in putting this event together and coordinating this event. We all owe Dr. Germani some thanks for putting this together. And it's been a pleasure working with you, Ian. Before I hand it over to Ian to introduce our keynote speaker, I want to just take a brief moment to acknowledge the fact that we are gathered here on land which is Treaty 4 and Treaty 6 territory, and which serves as the traditional territory of the Cree and Saulteaux, Assiniboine, and Métis people. This isn't just a cursory note. As we'll hear in Ms. LaDuke's presentation today, Indigenous knowledge offers a gateway into rethinking our relationship as humans with nature and with one another. As a housekeeping matter, I've been asked to remind those of you planning to attend the Briar Patch reception titled Snapshots of Unrest at the Neil Bockwell Civic Arts Center. Folks are to meet outside the Riddell Center at 6:30 p.m. for ride sharing. 5 cabs, courtesy of Briar Patch, have been ordered. And finally, I would just like to mention that ESAC is a small scholarly organization, and we're always looking for new active members. We meet annually at Congress, and our conference affords an opportunity not only to share research with colleagues in the broad field of environmental studies, but to network and engage with some of the researchers across this country who are dedicated to studying the human impact on the environment. So please check us out at esac.ca, and if you're a researcher with interests in environment, please consider joining us at Congress next year in Vancouver. So that sums up my introductory remarks. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy this talk, and I hope you will join me in welcoming our chair and moderator for the event, Dr. Ian Germani, who is a professor of history here at the University of Regina. Ian.
Thank you, Ryan. Firstly, I would like to respectfully echo Ryan's acknowledgement that this event is taking place on Treaty 4 territory, as well as the many obligations and implications of that fact. I would also like to acknowledge the presence here of David and Eric Powell, husband and son, respectively, of Barbara Powell, in whose honor this lecture is held every year. Barbara Powell was a member of the university's English department and a founder of its Women's and Gender Studies program. She was deeply respected as a scholar and administrator and is still fondly remembered by her colleagues. Thirdly, there are several institutions without whose assistance this evening's lecture would not have been possible. Specifically, I would like to thank the Environmental Studies Association of Canada for co-sponsoring the event, as well as the support of the Identity, Living Heritage, Communities Research Cluster, the university's Conference Fund, the Faculty of Arts, and the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies. Finally, I must thank Winona LaDuke's team at Honor the Earth for their assistance. There are too many individuals to thank for me to name them. Winona LaDuke has devoted a lifetime to telling the stories of her people and the stories of the land and the places to which her people belong. There is no more forthright defender not only of Indigenous peoples' rights to the land, but also of the restoration of a harmonious relationship between those peoples and the land that sustains them. She has cogently argued that the only sustainable economies in the history of North America have been indigenous ones, and that the secret to recovering such sustainability lies in restoring the values that were its original inspiration, including a reverence for the natural world and its sacred places. She has been at the forefront of the struggle to protect the land from harmful and unsustainable resource extraction. She has denounced the overbearing presence of the military in Indian country, and she has celebrated the leadership, courage, and resiliency of Indigenous women. Winona has received many awards for her advocacy, too many for me to list here. In 2002, she was the Green Party's nominee for Vice President of the United States. And in 2007, she was inducted into the United States National Women's Hall of Fame. Winona LaDuke has written a great deal. Although she expresses a preference for the long form of expository writing, she has also written short stories, a novel, poetry, as well as handbooks on tribal economics. There is even a Winona LaDuke reader. In her novel, Last Standing Woman, she tells the story of the Anishinaabe people to which she belongs and of the White Earth Reservation where she lives. The story is one familiar to both Canada and the United States, a story of conquest, dispossession, assimilation, and great suffering. But it is also a story of resistance, restitution, restoration, and hope. Ultimately, the novel ends on a note of optimism and on the possibility of a more constructive relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. The subject of her talk today, Building a Multicultural Democracy, Religion, Culture, and Identity in America, offers a different view of multiculturalism than the prevailing view in Canada, where official multiculturalism has been clearly rejected by most Indigenous peoples as an obstacle to the recognition of Indigenous rights. Winona LaDuke's writing suggests that the restoration of those rights might in fact be the precondition for a different sort of multiculturalism, built from the bottom up rather than imposed from the top down. Evoking a sacred place of the Anishinaabe, now known as Madeline Island, she writes, "Now, in the 21st century, Madeline Island is a place where the complexity of restoring a multicultural society in a sacred land is being revealed. The question is, how do we do so with grace?" Please join me in welcoming Winona LaDuke.
Anin, thank you for your gracious introduction. Anin Dawei Magana ni gogig magus. Bine sikwe go makwendodem gababani kagish kaniganing and dunjaba migwich. Thank you again for the honor of being here with you today. Today, as I came here, I thought I would speak kind of in honor of a couple of these men that are up here, of Louis Riel and Almighty Voice. A couple of men who were killed here in Saskatchewan, who were in fact patriots to a land, not to a flag. And I think at some fundamental level, that is the place that we need to come to, the place where we are patriots to a land. That will define, in fact, our loyalty. Now, for those who, most of you will know this story, and those stories, and I will not tell it in any length, but I do know that Riel was executed here in Regina. And he was, in fact, a patriot. And he was executed for treason. But he was elected 3 times to the House of Commons of Canada while he was a political refugee in the United States, or in what was known as Montana. Now, to be clear about this, the border that exists, the medicine line that exists between the United States and Canada is of really no relevance to me. I have relatives that live on both sides of the border, and as an Anishinaabe, my territory is on both sides of this border. And so to me, it makes no difference. But so I have great regard for these men. The second, Almighty Voice, also a tragic story of Saskatchewan. A story very much of Saskatchewan's past, in many ways its present, and hopefully not its future. A story of people denied their basic food. People denied their basic food, the buffalo here. And at 24 years old is when that man was killed. On May 30th, that would be tomorrow, 1897, 121 years ago. And he was shot after the largest manhunt in Canadian RCMP history, and he was shot essentially for shooting a cow, because they had run out of buffalo here in this territory. They'd all been killed off, and the people were forced into starvation. And so that moment in history is something we refer to as tragic. And we know that story at some level, although many Canadians and certainly most Americans prefer to have historical amnesia about these histories. But what I will say is that in many ways, those stories are repeated. And that is part of our challenge in our moment in history, is to not repeat those stories over. Because now is a time when people should be able to eat, people should be able to live, people should be able to continue their existence and their covenant with the Creator without being killed by the police. And that is in fact something that happens to way too many of our Native people in this day and time. Now I could tell these stories, or I could tell the stories similarly from that which is known as the United States. Because during the same time frame, there is a man named Standing Bear, who was a chief of the Ponca Nation in what is today known as Nebraska. He was not killed, but his people were forced to be removed from their territory to Oklahoma Indian Territory, and many of his people perished on the way, including his son. He returned finally to his own territory, but he was arrested for returning to his homeland. And he was held in captivity, and then he went to court, and he said that he should not be treated as, he needed to be treated as a human. And so in 1879, in the court of Nebraska, the writ of habeas corpus, for the first time in the history of the United States, was applied to a Native person, where a Native person was considered a human under the law. So what I am saying to begin with is that our people have many times tried to make this democracy work for us. We have tried many times to make this democracy work for us. And it has been a challenge. And at this moment in history, I feel like we are all coherent human beings, and it is our opportunity to do the right thing. And that is a little bit of the reason for this lecture. So let me tell you where I come from. Dawei Magana, this is my reservation, this is my lake. It is in the middle of the White Earth Reservation in northern Minnesota. It is a place where you can still drink the water from a lake. There is still wild rice that grows on almost all of our lakes. It is a place where you can get sugar from a tree and live on your land in the covenant that you have made with the Creator of Minobamataziwan in continuation. That is the place I live, is a good place from which I come. And my stories come to a great extent from there, but they are stories that are essentially the same stories that an Indigenous person could tell you from almost any community. In many ways, we are all essentially in the same boat. This is a piece of art by Roy Thomas. He is deceased, but I always like this art because in many ways it reminds me of a number of things. I was an undergraduate at Harvard University, and if you wanted to study the art of Europe, you went to the Fine Arts Department. And if you wanted to study Indigenous art, you went to anthropology. And what I will tell you is that most academic institutions have changed little over all these years. Indigenous people's knowledge is marginalized to the sidelines. Indigenous people's art is not seen as with the same validity as the art of European or American artists. But what I will tell you is that if you look into our art, you will see a little bit of who we are. Spirit lines that connect people, spirit lines that connect people and beings, the teachings that we are all related, an entirely different worldview. And at this moment in time where we are, in our language, we would call this month a Wabagana-Gizis. I'm not sure how Crees and Sotos call it, but it means the flower moon. Wabagana-Gizis, followed by Odamina-Gizis, the strawberry moon, Mean-Gizis, blueberry moon, then a moon called Manominake-Gizis, the wild rice-making moon. Then we have Watibaga Gizis, and the leaves change color, moon. Banakweo Gizis, the leaves fall. Gashkano Gizis, that's around November when it freezes over. Manadu Gizis Soons, Gishi Manitou Gizis, the great spirit moons. Those are some of our moons in our language, and I thought you might like to hear a little of our Anishinaabe-Moan. It is related. These are my relatives, the people that are here. But I don't know if you also noticed that in my language, there is not a single moon that is named after a Roman emperor. And what I want to say is it is possible to have a worldview that has nothing to do with empire. And y'all be okay if you just let that stuff go. Things will work out a lot better. You could have a lot easier multicultural democracy if you get rid of some of your notions of empire. Just some simple suggestions. So let me talk about being in the same boat and where we want to go. I'm going to, talk a little bit about where we've been and how I remember things, because I don't have either historical amnesia, nor do I have ecological amnesia. I'm someone who remembers because I was told and I saw it. This is, when Donald Trump, I know y'all thought I was going to talk about Trump. I ain't going to talk that much about him. He's part of the problem, but obviously. But, when Donald Trump talks about making America great again, this is my idea of making America great again. When you have 8,000 varieties of corn, that's when America was great. That's when North America was great. 8,000 varieties of corn. Now, we all weren't slacking over here. We were busy getting all these corn varieties of different colors and different kinds that, could do all kinds of cool things. And, for those of you who know me, I'm a corn grower. And, because my father told me I should grow corn. But then a few years ago, I grew this pink corn. It was a Seneca pink corn. And it was all magenta. It was stunning. And someone said to me, they said, why you grow pink corn? Why don't you grow blue corn? I said, why don't you grow blue corn? I mean, there's 8,000 varieties. You could grow whatever color you want. You know what I'm saying? Tremendous agrobiodiversity, and that's when North America was great. That's my idea of when North America was great. North America was great when we had tremendous biodiversity with all our animals, right? And 50 million buffalo, it's a lot of animals. The single largest migratory herd in the world, and it graced these prairies that today you call Saskatchewan. Were graced by this giant herd. And this herd fed on 250 species of grass. And those 250 species of grass and that buffalo is how you got that topsoil that feeds us all today. It was not produced by man, it was produced by buffalo. It was produced by plants. It was produced by our Creator. And so that is, when this territory was great. That is when this territory was great. And this is, some of the extent of that buffalo herd. And I think about that because it is really important as we go forward. I am someone that is really intent upon making this good future. But you cannot be afraid, and you cannot carry around so much baggage. Because if you carry all those bags of whether it is settler colonialism or empire or amnesia, we will not learn, and we will not be able to forgive, and we will not be able to move forward. So here is, the first Constitution, really, And I think about this, and a lot of people, you are all a pretty enlightened bunch, I would assume. But the fact is that when your ancestors came to this country, they had no experience with democracy. They had experience with monarchy and feudalism. And y'all still are really into the royals, from what I can see. At some super embarrassing level, Just be honest about it. It's really embarrassing, Canada, And but they didn't really have a lot of experience with democracy or how you treated people. We're the people who had representational democracy here. We're the people that understood that leadership is something that is, a responsibility. I had a lot of privilege in my life, and, with all, just great honor to the Iroquois Confederacy, I think about that construct of a confederation, which embodies cooperation instead of competition. That's an essential element of longevity of any society, is cooperation. And to bring together all of those nations to form, a confederation under a tree of peace is a gift that, I cannot say the United States and Canada have yet learned, in many ways. You know, we're still a lot about conflict with everybody else. And I say that, you know, there's a lot of teachings from that, but, you know, they say that the last one come in, you know, Tadadaho, he is a pretty rough shape. And when you can bring in that last person and make them your leader, that is a significant gift. You know, the guys who wrote the American Constitution, Ben Franklin and them, they took a lot of notes. They went up to see the Iroquois, tried to figure out how to have a representational democracy. You know, saw the long houses, saw the long deliberations of representational democracy, but they didn't take really good notes, so they omitted things in their notes. And we all know that now. You know, we know basic concepts like that it was the women who appointed and removed the chiefs. You know, and women did not have the right to vote in the United States for a very long time, so that was like a little omission, you know. Another omission that I think is significant is kind of the construct. Now, you know, forgive me if I say this incorrectly, but that, you know, the term I've used is that you condole a chief. You condole a chief when you bring them in. And I think about that because there's a lot of elements of leadership, you know. The idea of condoling someone means, like, first they are replacing someone who is great, who is now gone. Another teaching of condoling is that the significance of leadership is the responsibility that you carry when you are a leader. And so there is condolences of sorrow that is past that say that, you know, you are giving up much to provide that leadership. And so I think, you know, those are very important lessons. You know, and I think about politicians today, and they are not the same as those great leaders that we have known. You know, and I feel like at some point it is important, incumbent upon us, essential for us to raise our standards, to recover our standards of what leaders are. You know, it is not what is depicted, and of course, you know, Donald Trump himself is perhaps the worst example of that behavior. And I don't think many people here would probably disagree with me. But, you know, having said that, I say that, you know, there's a lot of lessons that we have had in our systems of governance that would be well taught, again, here. You know, that whether it is these systems of representational democracy, you know, whether it is a more egalitarian system of leadership. Now, you know, people ask me sometimes to describe what I think of as Anishinaabe leadership, and, you know, maybe some of the other Anishinaabe here will think different than I, but often I look, you know, to the sky and I see a flock of geese flying across, and you see them here too. And if you watch a flock of geese, there's not one goose that is at the front the whole time. It is too much work. And so there's this undulating leadership, you know, and that is what you have to have. You have to have a broad base of leadership so that different people are leaders at different times. You know, and in our territories, we have different people that are leaders at different times and different moments. And that is a great teaching to have as opposed to the hierarchical forms of leadership that have been taught and have been carried out, is a more dispersed and decentralized form of leadership. You know, and I think about it a lot, you know, down in the States, people talk about the 1%. I don't know if they talk about the 1% up here, the 1% that control everything. I don't know, you probably got about 3% or something, I don't really know. You know, but you understand what I'm saying, right? That whole thing about the 1% that controls the majority of the wealth of the United States. And I keep thinking, you know, well, if they're 1% and we're the 99%, why don't we act like the 99%? You know what I'm saying? It's just like, why do we act like 1% got everything, is in charge of everything if we're the 99%? You know, it is like finding this leadership among yourselves and being responsible. You know, in myself, people sometimes call me an activist, but I don't consider myself an activist. I consider myself a responsible citizen, you know, a responsible human being trying to do the right thing, you know, and I think that we all have that gift and we all have that responsibility, and the question is when we find or how we act upon our agency to do those things that are right. So I think about that, you know, and I think about our forms of leadership, our systems of governance, you know, our ideas, for instance, that, you know, wealth. You know, we do not aggrandize wealth in traditional Anishinaabe or in other indigenous societies. We do not aggrandize wealth. We honor generosity. You know, that is seen through the potlatch. That is seen through our giveaways, where your status is associated with how much you give away, not how much you hoard. You know, that is an entirely different teaching of leadership, an entirely different teaching of civil society. Instead of living in a society which is punitive in its justice system, our systems are reconciliation-based. You know, that is because in the end we are all going to have to live here. And I think of that significantly in terms of the United States, where, of the 9 million prisoners in the world, 2.2 million of them live in the United States. And most of them are brown and black and poor. And that is true in Canada as well. The people who stack up in our prisons, and the prison industrial complex grows in North America. But the whole idea, the significance of that construct, in our society, the dysfunction of a society which cannot heal, which cannot make good, which cannot learn to give together, to live together, is the challenges that we face. And those are challenges that, I look to our Indigenous knowledge systems to return to the restorative systems. So, just to say that, as I started this, I start with some of the gifts that we have as Indigenous people in our Indigenous knowledge. And I say I've been super privileged in my life, I have a pretty good Western education, but I have had great privilege to be with some of the great Indigenous leaders and to sit at their feet and to listen to them for many, many days. And so I have high regard. And I wish that, was much more standard in the curriculum, the knowledge of Indigenous nations, because it would inform better decision-making by policymakers if they had some of the basic precepts of Indigenous thinking baked down. Cooperation, not competition. The idea of, now it is talked about in economic systems, but it's called intergenerational equity. The idea that in each deliberation you consider the impact upon the 7th generation from now. Foundational to our governance systems. The idea that the Creator's law is the highest law, higher than the laws made by nation states or municipalities. And one would do well to live in accordance with the Creator's law, instead of, frankly, making up a bunch of laws to serve your own means and serve your own needs. And the ideas of interspecies equity and the relatives, whether they have wings or fins or roots or paws. Those are all elements of Indigenous democracy, elements of Indigenous governance and thinking. So that's a little bit about our history. I'm going to talk a little bit about what went wrong, okay? And y'all got this basic memo, and so I'm not going to go too long into it, but let us just say that, it is not a simple conflict between governance systems. It's a conflict of practice, because, governance systems, and, I think about it, and even the paradigm itself, Canada and the United States talk about things in regulatory systems like natural resource management. I'm like, no, what we really got to do is manage ourselves. The natural world manages itself pretty good. You need to be partner with the natural world. You understand what I'm saying? It's like that is a different worldview entirely. The ideas of ownership. Indigenous people, our term Anishinaabe Aking means the land to which the people belong. It does not mean crown property. It does not mean private property. It means the land to which the people belong. That is an entirely different construct. And those are worldviews that are very different. And so I refer to these two worldviews as an Indigenous worldview of Minobamataziwan and a Wendigo worldview, And I know that some people will take that hard, but as an economist by training, I will tell you that what we participate in is what I would refer to as Wendigo economics, a system which is unsustainable and in the end lays to waste more than you will need to survive upon. And I say that because you can say in theory, and I know scholars are so good at the theories of this and the theories of that, but the practice is as important. You can have a teaching, but if you do not practice it on how you live on the land, it will make no difference. So what Wendigo economics looks like is this. This is, this could be Saskatchewan, this is Nebraska, this is buffalo skulls. This is why our people starved. This is how the West was won, was the destruction of the buffalo herd. The buffalo did not disappear, the buffalo were massacred by Canadian and American militaries that sought to drive our people off of our prairies and out of our strongholds into small reserves where we would be forced into starvation until we struck out like almighty boys to try to feed our people. That is the story of this province. That is the story of Wendigo economics. It is a story of extractive ownership. Instead of having a relationship where, in a lot of our territories, we harvest only what we need and we leave the rest. We live in an economy which takes far more than it needs and does not leave the rest. and lays it to waste. That's what extractive ownership is about. And I have to say, like, I could talk about the United States, but why bother? I'm in Canada. So here you are, and a lot of people act as if Canada's a lot better, but everybody in this country knows that it is not. And the fact of the matter is that the Canadian staples economy is now destroying a large part of the world. 75% of the mining corporations of the world are Canadian. Most of the human rights violations that are occurring by mining companies are occurring under the Canadian flag. So there is much blood on the Canadian hands for this economic system that is a Wendigo system. The fact is that if you keep taking as much, it requires a constant intervention into other people's territories and a constant violations of other people's human rights. And so it is really hard to speak the words of democracy and human rights from whatever politician that exists if you continue to slam your foot down upon our faces and take our land, take our water, and take that which is our lives. The price is easy to see. This is the fires at Fort McMurray, but I could have shown you the $17 billion worth of fires in California last year. This is the price of climate change, and we feel it as we go outside today in weather that is the same in Minnesota, weather that I should only feel in August. I should not feel this weather in May, and yet I have had 3 weeks of it in Minnesota. So I have planted my crops early. And I pray for the best. But in the economic systems of this country, it is not unlike the economic systems of the United States. There is no planning for the future. That is to say that by 2020, a couple years from now, Munich Re, the world's largest reinsuring company, predicts that we will be spending 20% of world GDP on climate change-related disasters. Could be hurricanes, could be fires. I don't know. But all I know is I'm not sure how that's getting paid for. That's what I don't know. And if you had the opportunity to not do it, wouldn't it be better than to do it? That would be foresight in your thinking. This is, of course, Saskatchewan's fracking, And, I'll talk a little bit about North Dakota because I'm more familiar with it. We refer to North Dakota as the Deep North. And I think some of you saw that at Standing Rock, but what I'm saying is that Saskatchewan is further north. So let us be honest about the brutality that exists in this province and not pretend that North Dakota is the only pariah of human rights violations. Let us not pretend. This is, Canada's larger legacy of stupidity is the tar sands. And I look at the price of tar sands oil in relationship to the value of the loonie, and it is, you're a petrostate, is what you are. The price of your economy is predicated on the price of your tar sands, and that, the price of your foreign exchange or the value. And I think about that, and I think about, how dangerous that is in thinking for a society. If your future is totally based on some of the most destructive oil on the planet, it is not good for any of us, no matter who we are. And so, kind of the situation I find myself in is looking at the folly of, politicians these days in whatever arena they are and wishing for, more enlightenment and a total lack of knowledge of where you are. So this is a photo I picked up yesterday. This is from Estevan, Saskatchewan, the sunniest place in the country, huh? It's the sunniest city in the country, right? Estevan, Saskatchewan, and what do you guys got there? Big coal generator, huh? That's the dumbest thing I ever heard. That's like the dumbest thing I'm really sorry, But then to top it off, what did someone call it? Saskatchewan crazy bananas or something? This $1.4 billion carbon capture and storage project. That's a total failure. $1.4 billion. Be honest, it's kind of like putting lipstick on a pig. You know what I'm saying? It's carbon. You took it out. You can't just put it back in and pretend like it didn't happen, Canada. We all know that. There's no carbon sequestration ferry, and there's no nuclear waste ferry. You just don't do dumb stuff and then try to find someone to get rid of it. That's what the physics will tell you and the brilliant people will tell you, but you're going to spend another $1.4 billion on that dumb stuff before I blink an eye. But the same time as you did this, I think it was this last week, the state of New York spent $1.4 billion on renewable energy projects. 26 of them, utility scale solar. So I was like, there's some enlightened people down there, and take a few notes. And so, don't take it hard. Canada, you're not the only ones that do dumb stuff, but. So last part of this here is just how that stuff, falls over, and how it affects our democracy. So here's my little reservation, White Earth in northern Minnesota. And, my problems, most of my problems in my state, and basically the dereliction of state duties and the violations of civil rights that are occurring in Minnesota are recurring at the behest of Canadian corporations. That's exactly what is going on in Minnesota. All my major problems are Canadian corporations. PolyMet Mine, all Canadian, and Enbridge. And so I say that, and I'm just going to be totally honest with all of you who are here. I've had a 5-year relationship with Enbridge that's really dysfunctional, and I want a divorce. 5 years. I tell you my story. First they announced, I told you about my little happy life, wild rice, 10,000 years of harvesting on the same lakes. That's what a sustainable economy looks like, right? We're all doing pretty good, mining our own beeswax up on White Earth, and one day the Enbridge Corporation announces it wants to put a pipeline across our territory. First, they want to bring fracked oil in from the Bakken oil. It's called the Sandpiper. It's an absolutely essential project, and they had to have this new route because why? This is a problem y'all have up here too. They have something on their pipeline routes. It's called, I think they call it, what do they call it? They call it like pipeline, like it's too many pipelines in one place. It's too many pipelines in a row, and they can't put any more pipelines in there. And so rather than clean up their old mess, what they want to do is make a new mess. And so what the corporation want to do, I got 6 old pipelines running across northern Minnesota, put in the 1960s and 1970s before the Clean Water Act and Clean Air Act. Those are laws we passed in the United States to protect our water, protect our air. But before that, those corporations put in those pipelines, and they cross, on our Leech Lake Reservation, they cross through there, and then they cross through the Fond du Lac Reservation. They also hit Red Lake Reservation with that Clearbrook facility up there. And so they put those pipelines in, and then they come in and they want to get some new pipeline in, and then now they got this Line 3. And so they announced this brand new corridor. And I didn't really know much about pipelines. If people know me, I spent a lot of time fighting uranium mining. That's my last experience up here is northern Saskatchewan. So I know a little bit about you, Saskatchewan. And your uranium mining industries. And uranium mining and dam projects. I lived up on James Bay. My family is also from James Bay. And but they announced this pipeline, so I go, well, I figure I better study up, because someone got to know about a pipeline. And I'm probably just like the rest of you. I didn't really pay attention to pipelines. I mean, they move stuff around. I'm actually not opposed to pipelines. I like water and sewer. I think that's fantastic. It's all first world and stuff. Too bad we don't have those in most reserves. Oh. I'm sorry. Just had to put that in there for that 161 reserves without running water, right? Or potable water. Yeah, go Canada. All right. I'm sorry, but Canada's always talking bad about, everybody's always saying, oh, Canada's so perfect. I was like, no, Canada's not so perfect. Anyway, so, I'm not opposed to pipelines. I just think that it's what's in them is my question, right? And so they propose first this fracked oil pipeline. And so I get out and I, write up some information, try to inform my people. And then I start working and across northern Minnesota. I write a bunch of articles for local papers. And pretty soon we built this multiracial alliance to oppose Enbridge, right? It was on Enbridge's Sandpiper. And so we're out there. And, my theory was if you got the Norwegians mad, it'd be great. The Lutherans, they're like all mad at Enbridge down there. And so we fought them. We fought them in the Minnesota regulatory process, which I'm praying works for us. And so, we forced an environmental impact statement on a pipeline that they didn't want to do an impact statement on, a 640,000 barrel per day pipeline that they thought they'd just slide through. And we forced it. And we showed up at every hearing and we rode our horses against the current of the oil. We prayed, we had a lot of ceremonies. We worked real hard, and 4 years we rode our horses. And one day after our 4th ride, on August 2nd, 2016, and the court-ordered EIS is underway, Environmental Impact Statement, the Enbridge Corporation announced the cancellation of the Sandpiper. They announced the cancellation of a pipeline. And so I say that because a lot of people don't get to see pipes leaving, but I'm someone who's seen pipes leaving. I've seen pipes leaving my territory, and I cried when I saw them leaving. I saw them leaving this year. They finally cleared out those pipe yards, I was like, but I say that, but the same day as they announced that they purchased 28% of the Dakota Access Pipeline, right? And the reason I'm telling you this story is that this is how your democracy gets compromised, when the rights of corporations supersede the rights of individuals. And when civil society becomes hostage to the addiction to fossil fuels and oil. And basically what I want to say is something that you all know. On a worldwide scale, there's only one people that can consume more than an American per capita energy. And I was always trying to figure how you could consume more than an American, but you could be a Canadian. And per capita, although I'm thinking Dubai might have us all by now, right? Y'all know what I'm saying on that, right? But my point is that we've developed this level of addiction to fossil fuels. We've kind of jacked ourselves up on this level of steroids on a fossil fuel economy, highly inefficient. For instance, the combustion engine that got me here is 16% efficient, but an electric engine in a car is 65% efficient. So we've got a system that's based on inefficiency and that is fed by this massive amount of oil, and we've all become addicts. And I know we're addicts because everybody here gets bummed out if their cell phone doesn't have a charge, right? People get very, very stressed out if they don't have their hookup, right? And the thing is that level of addiction is a pretty big problem because that means, you just kind of start doing what addicts do. And I don't know if any of you have any addicts in your family. I got an addict in my family, and they do stuff they rationalize their behavior. You know what I'm saying? They're kind of and it's usually someone else's fault. That's my observation is I didn't do that. You made me do that. Or, and then there's sometimes they lie, sometimes they just do bad stuff, and sometimes they steal. I mean, there's a lot of bad stuff done by addicts, right? And the problem is that that's kind of what we become. And now we're in this situation where you got your public policy, is turned over to your dealers, which is, what happens when large corporations write your regulations. And you wonder what's happening to your democracy. And so what I'm suggesting is that that's a little bit of the problem that we are facing, is that we have clouded our sight, and the frenzy that drove Manifest Destiny, and the frenzy that drove the mythology and pathology, frankly, of a lot of the creation of these countries, is something that is now in this frenzy. And that is where we are. And there's a lot of bad decisions being made, and it turns out it's not about just all of us. But this is, what we found when we went to North Dakota. Enbridge financed 28% of that, and I went out there and, I saw this. I saw a pipeline that could have gone north of the city of Bismarck, the White City, but instead they decided to run it just north of the Standing Rock Reservation. People who already didn't have adequate infrastructure like the rest of tribal people. 8,000 people and I think about, 5 doctors or something, a clinic that was built, a hospital that was built in the 1960s. You understand what I'm saying? Totally inadequate. And those people, every community, as I said, I'm a rural development economist by training, but, tribal, First Nations communities, Native reservations, we're in a process, it's not underdeveloped countries, it's underdeveloping is what it is. When, first of all, your health is already compromised, but you got to go someplace else for a doctor. And so you never get well, and then somebody else is making their life off of your poverty. And that's what's going on all across Canada. And that's what's going on all across North Dakota. The prisons are full. The prisons are full. And the prisons are, and the hospitals are full. And, and that is certainly the situation at Standing Rock. And the treatment of Native people in North Dakota is bad. It is bad. But it had some origins. It had some origins in its history of the same history that killed Louis Riel, the same history. The same history that killed Almighty Voice. This history of, we will force you into submission, that history. And then we will forget that happened and make a new story that, we just kind of did this, and it all worked out. And we'll just, continue that mythology. In North Dakota, what happened over the last years in North Dakota is that they lost a lot of people out there. A lot of non-Indian people moved out. I was telling earlier, we had this, little gathering on the Buffalo, and I was talking about these demographers, from Rutgers University, Frank and Deborah Popper, and they, were viewing the Northern Plains territory, and they noticed this depopulation that kept occurring in the prairies. And I'm sure that that happened to a great extent in Saskatchewan too. People left to move places like Vancouver or Toronto, or in our place they maybe moved to Minneapolis or San Francisco. Like North Dakota became largely, a lot of the counties returned to frontier status, is what they called it. The only populations that kept growing were those First Nations or those native populations. But those non-Indian people live out there, and they observed that, and the poppers said, what y'all should do is you should probably just, it's not sustainable, you should probably just pull those fences and return that whole territory to buffalo. That's what they suggested, because the poppers said, North Dakota's not going to survive as is. And that was in 2000 when that happened. Well, just after that, they figured out how to frack North Dakota. And in 2005, they passed the Energy Policy Act, which allowed fracking in the country without any environmental regulation, essentially, which is pretty much what you got here, the same thing. Put 602 chemicals down and hope it works out for you over the long term, and basically create large areas that are national sacrifice areas. And so you lay that on the land, this historic racism, then you lay this poverty, and then you add oil to it, and you get a really bad form of democracy. And that's what they got in North Dakota. And that's why it looks like this. And then when a company comes through with a lot of promises, and the oil companies are then backed by these corporations and are backed by this equipment, this is the breakdown of civil society. So this is here, two pieces of equipment, I didn't even know what they are. The one on the right is called an MRAP, Mine-Resistant Armored Personnel Carrier. Second one is called an LRAD, Long-Range Acoustic Device. It's intended to blow your eardrums out. That MRAP is intended to drive through a building. That's what that's intended for. Now, in the United States, what they've done historically, and then Obama canned it, but this is under the Obama administration, but was surplusing military equipment to civilian police forces. Now, that's a little bit of a problem, I think, because military equipment should not be used on civilians. Because I signed up for first world democracy. I didn't sign up for, living in Honduras, where I could face a Canadian mining corporation and get shot. I signed up to live in North America, because this is my land. This is my land. And I don't expect to be shot by the government who came here. But that's what you're looking at there. And that's where the rights of corporations supersede the rights of individuals. And this is what it looks like in practice. And this is what it looks like in practice. But what I know is what you know is that this is not the only place that that's occurring. And, with the decision yesterday or today of Trudeau to purchase the Kinder Morgan pipeline, that was a very, very, very dangerous decision, it's very, very bad decision for the implications for civil society and the rights of corporations that supersede the rights of humans and the rights of the land. And so this is kind of what I'm calling for, is something I refer to as the Sitting Bull Plan. And I say this because a lot of you remember that after World War II, there was a plan known as the Marshall Plan, right? And the Marshall Plan was about the reconstruction of Europe. In the Marshall Plan, it was a massive investment in the future of Europe, and division, and different elements like that. And I think about that, but basically what we need at this point in time is a Sitting Bull plan. And the reason that I chose Sitting Bull is because he's a visionary political leader, died way too young, as most of our great political leaders have died. But in his case, he said a lot of amazing things as a political strategist and as a philosopher. But what he said is, let us put our minds together to see what kind of future we can make for our children. Let us put our minds together to see what kind of future we can make for our children. And I think about that because at its essence, democracy is a participatory sport. It is something that you got to be at the table or you are on the menu. It is something that you need to be there and you need to be present. And it is something that has to be not only inclusive, but has to be on the terms of the people who are there, particularly the terms of the First Nations who are there. And so, in the future that we look at, let us look at how that is going to be carried out. Okay, so this is some pieces of that. Now, today we had that Buffalo Nations gathering, and I was happy. And this is a photo that's from a long time ago from the Buffalo Nations gathering, which was in 2014, the Buffalo Treaty was signed, Northern Tribes Buffalo Treaty was signed. It was signed to the Blackfeet Nation in Montana. And I think about this because this is a treaty to protect the buffalo that was signed to bring together these leaders, these people who are cultural keepers, people who are keepers of these large buffalo herds, and people who also understand the relationship between the buffalo, our Mother Earth, and our land, Oma'a King. How the buffalo is how prairies are made. How the buffalo is how this land is kept alive through the sound of their hooves. and the teachings that they have and the life that they give. Buffalo change and transform ecosystems. And in the remnant herds that remain, many of them in our indigenous territories, what you see is our First Nations coming together to form corridors between their nations so that the buffalo can again roam, the buffalo can again return. And I think about this treaty and its signing, and I remember that I believe it was the same day or the day before that treaty was signed, that the bad treaty was signed in Canada, and I think that was a trade agreement signed by Harper, basically that mortgaged a lot of Canada to China. And I was thinking, you can make enlightened treaties or you can make not enlightened treaties, you know. And what I would say is in all clarity, treaties to protect, to restore, to restain, to strengthen are better than treaties to extract, treaties to, to diminish the stature of life. So, I honor that treaty. I honor the treaty to protect the sacred that was signed in 2013 by many of the First Nations facing the pipelines. The treaty to protect the sacred. And the Treaty of the Salish Sea was also signed in 2014. Treaties of governance between Indigenous First Nations that said the Salish Sea, out there on what is known as the Pacific coast, that territory should be free from nuclear waste. That territory should be free from oil tankers. That treaty should be returned to the wealth that it deserves and its rights incumbent upon us as the rights of Mother Nature. So now let me just tell you a little story about democracy in action in Minnesota. This is us. This is a billboard in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. Now somehow we have the agencies to stand up to the Enbridge Corporation and you all don't. I'm trying to figure that out, quite frankly. I'm saying that my problems come from Canada, and now the Canadian pipeline company known as Enbridge, coming from Alberta, proposes to cross Saskatchewan, proposes to cross Manitoba, and to come down with this new pipeline, Line 3. They refer to it as a replacement pipe, but it is a brand new corridor. And that's not a replacement, that's a new corridor, and it's a new pipe. And so we've been fighting it, basically, for 5 years. And Enbridge continues to tell the Canadian government and its shareholders and the media that things are all good in the hood in Minnesota. But they are not good in the hood in Minnesota. In fact, if the regulatory process works, they will never get a permit in Minnesota. That's if the system works, which I am praying for, because I'm a water protector. I didn't get shot at Standing Rock. I didn't get arrested at Standing Rock, but I will stand on my land in Minnesota, and I invite everybody to join me. So what we are looking at is in the state of Minnesota, in the regulatory process, what has happened is that in October, the Minnesota Department of Commerce, responsible for evaluating the economic justification for the pipeline, recommended against issuing a certificate of need to the Enbridge Corporation, saying that Minnesota did not, in fact, need this pipeline and that Enbridge had not proved that it was needed. So recommended against issuing a certificate of need. And on April 23rd of this year, the